am the mighty beach house tiki god. The artist formerly known as Gelthar the Plunderer. At 10 p.m. watch Newt Raw. 11 p.m. Singled Out. 11:30 p.m. Beavis and Butthead. And at 12 midnight Alternative Nation. Now stay tuned for Newt Raw.
Hi, I'm Tabitha Soren, and I have 2 words for you. Newt Raw.
This is your standard set?
No, sir. That was just for you.
And are you all ready?
We're all set. Yeah, it should be fun. Make sure we have fun.
Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, the most talked about man in politics and the man who's doing most of the talking these days, has joined MTV News for an unedited, no-holds-barred conversation about the agenda he has set for America and why you should care. Joining us are Jim Brennan, a 21-year-old senior at Dartmouth, a member of the college's conservative union and originally from New Jersey. Kate Ross is from Chicago. She's 22 years old in law school at the University of Michigan, and she worked for Ross Perot in 1992. Joining us from California is 25-year-old Ariel Gore, a graduate student at UC Berkeley and a single mother of a 5-year-old who has been on welfare most of that time. Hakasa Wapenyi, she's proud to say she has liberal views, she's from New York, she has a degree from Harvard, and is in medical school at Tufts. John Crane is conservative about most issues. He's 21 years old from Richmond, Virginia, and works as a painting contractor. Our second guest from California is Rob Levine, originally from Connecticut. He works at the internet publication of Wired magazine, and he too is fond of the L word. But first, Mr. Speaker, welcome. We're glad to have you here. Before we get into our discussion today, I'd like to ask you a question that's been in the news recently. President Clinton has come out for uncoerced school prayer. Do you think we still need a constitutional amendment on school prayer?
Well, I think we have to see exactly what that means in legal terms, and I thought it was a very positive step in the right direction. I'm delighted to see that he agrees that there have been some examples of repression sufficiently important that the President's now sending apparently this document to every school in the country to say, yes, you do have these rights. So I think, first of all, let's school year this fall, see if it stands up in court, and I think it's a very positive step in the right direction.
Okay, well, let's get started with our panelist questions. Since there are so many students here, we want to start with the topic of education and cutting school loans.
Okay, Speaker Gingrich, I'm a Republican, and I definitely agree with a lot of your positions and a lot of the positions in the contract with America. But one thing I can't really agree with are proposed cuts or freezes in educational funding, especially in the society that we're living in today. I was wondering if you could comment on that and how you think that will affect young people and their drive for education and careers.
Sure. I want to draw a distinction between, this is a very complicated topic. You talk about cuts in education, whether you're talking about slowing down the rate of increase in some things, or you're talking about education before college, education in college, graduate school. Let me take just a couple quick examples. I think we ought to have lifetime learning. I think we ought to find ways to say that all your life you're going to have to keep learning, you're going to do different things. I think we ought to take all the unemployment compensation and say if you're going to get unemployment compensation, you ought to be doing something to learn, that we shouldn't be giving you money to subsidize deer hunting and bass fishing. And if you need the money in order to get a better job, fine, but then you ought to get training. That actually increases the available money for education by $8 or $9 billion a year at the adult level. Second, I think the only argument we're having over student loans, there's no argument about getting the student loan. We all agree that everybody ought to be able to borrow the money. The only argument is whether or not you ought to directly pay back the money, or whether as a taxpayer you ought to indirectly pay the interest on the debt. And let me make this very clear, because I think this is one of the phoniest arguments going on right now. If you had somebody who sent you a present for your birthday,
okay,
and about a month later after you'd thanked them, this bill showed up in the mail, because in fact they intended for you to pay for the present they sent you, you wouldn't think that was a particularly neat idea. A child born this year will pay $187,000 in interest on the federal debt in their lifetime. That is,
but Mr. Speaker, don't you think that...
Let me just make this point. That is, they'll pay $3,500 every year they work for their entire lifetime, just for interest on the debt. So we're not loaning you money that somebody else is paying. What we're saying to the younger generation is, if we loan you, and this is the current liberal position, if we loan you interest-free loans, by the way, We are going to borrow that money, and when you get to go to work, you're going to pay the interest on your interest-free loans. The difference is you might pay off your loans in 5, 8, 10, 15 years. You'll never pay off the federal debt. So you're going to literally pay for your entire lifetime for the very same loan that you were told was interest-free. We think it is more honest, and we think it's fairer to say to students, we'll guarantee you can borrow the money, we'll guarantee you can go to school, but then you ought to take care of the specific obligation you incur, because you could actually pay it off.
So you're saying it's a larger picture issue then?
Not just larger picture. You'll actually pay more money over your lifetime. But if the government go borrow loans you the money.
Don't you think it's in the interest of the entire society to have a better educated populace? I mean, we're not talking about sending people to college only so they can get better jobs. You're talking about making an investment in the future of America.
Sure. I believe that to the point where I think we ought to have a lot of money spent on education. But let's go back to the student loans again. 2 of you graduate from high school at the same time. One of you goes off to become a painting contractor, goes to work. The other decides to go to college. The painting contractor is now working extra to loan you the money so you can go to college. You later on have a higher income than the painting contractor. Now, you decide to stay in college. You get another interest-free loan. You now become a plastic surgeon. You're now making $300,000 a year. I'm just suggesting to you that
isn't that why
part of it ought to relate to your own self-interest and to a question of and again, I think we ought to guarantee you the loans. We ought to make sure you have access to them, and we should say you don't have to pay any of them back while you're in school.
Well, along those lines, we do actually have a painting contractor at the table, which is, I'm sure, the catalyst for your comment. But John fell through the cracks in terms of the student loan system. Tell him what happened to you.
I'm unable to receive financial aid because of the tax bracket that my parents fall into, and I've been, out from under their wing for 3 years, and I'm still, unable to receive financial aid. So what kind of equal opportunity are you going to make available to?
I think we should redesign the system to guarantee that you can borrow the money to go to school. And any American who can get access to a school, as long as they maintain grades and stay in the school, ought to be able to borrow the money. I don't think there's any question that the current system favors some, hurts others, and is, I think, unequal. The different, and I think the government ought to be willing to guarantee you're borrowing the money. The only difference is the question whether or not you ought to repay the money directly, or, as I said a minute ago, you ought to pay the money as a taxpayer. Because your generation, the question for your generation is not, are you going to pay the money?
Right, but I know that in terms of, I'm in medical school at the moment, and I have a lot of friends who are in low-income bracket, some minorities, and I know that they may not be able to go to med school, and they may not choose to go to med school if they're not able to take out these subsidized loans for $40,000 a year education. I mean, it becomes a really dire situation.
But wait. If they're guaranteed to borrow the money,
yes,
okay, and they can borrow, and they don't have to pay a penny of it while they're in school,
right,
okay, so we're not increasing their cost as a student at all. The only question, let's take your friends.
But you're increasing debt after school.
And if your friends were poor enough, your friends probably got Pell Grants. I mean, the society has been generous, has tried to reach out, has given a fair amount of money away to try to encourage people to get up to this point. Now they're going to go to graduate school.
Yes.
They want to become a medical doctor. This is a perfect example. They have 3 cousins who didn't go to college. Those 3 cousins are working at relatively $6 an hour, $8 an hour, $10 an hour jobs. Part of what we're saying is the doctor is ultimately going to make enough money to pay back the loan. And remember, the money being loaned to you is being loaned by you. If we were running a surplus and we're in a position to say we have spare money, maybe it would make sense to pay the interest on your debt. But if we have to borrow the money to loan to you, you are the generation that is going to pay the highest share of your income on interest on the federal debt. You your younger brothers and sisters, or in the case, since you're in your 20s, your children. I mean, people, when you have children, they will inherit a huge debt burden.
Well, let's put aside doctors for a moment. Let me ask you this. Under President Clinton's policy, individuals may pay back less of their student loan if they take a lower paying occupation like teaching. Do you agree with that?
No. I mean, I think if you want teachers, it would make sense to create a specific loan fund that said, we want math teachers, therefore if you go into math teaching, we'll help.
Well, how do you encourage people to not to take higher income?
Why would you? I mean, I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to ask you on the set what I'm not going to ask you on the set what you make.
Well, likewise.
But mine's public knowledge. But my point would be, why would you automatically have a bias in favor of lower-paying jobs? I mean, it seems to me it's one thing. Is teaching not an honorable profession that you should encourage young people to go into, and if they can't afford to go into it and pay back their loans, because you graduate with $10,000 in debt on average from undergraduate school. The distinction I just made was, if you go into a profession that we want you to go into, being a policeman, being a teacher, being a medical technician, there are a number of professions you could decide you want to encourage people to go into. You could define by profession and say, when you go into that, we will subsidize repayment.
But didn't you get a loan to be a teacher?
I just said, I favor that by profession, not by income.
As far as we were talking, you were saying that the doctor should, it's unfair to charge the person who makes less for the education of someone who makes more. Isn't that basically why we have a progressive income tax in this country? And isn't that what the Republicans have tried to push back?
No, that's my whole point. The purpose of the progressive income tax is not to charge the person who's making $25,000 in order to subsidize the person who makes $200,000.
But it's not doing that. The person who makes $200,000 pays a higher portion of taxes than the person who makes $25,000. Therefore, when you're talking about education, which is good for the entire society, the people who make more are actually shouldering a heavier burden than the people who don't make that much, as well they should.
Isn't that sort of redistribution?
Okay, actually, let me interrupt for a second, but we'll be right back, and we will continue this discussion right after this.
News. Who decides what's news? It seems like all the cameras are pointed in the same direction.
The system sucks.
But we know there's a million stories out there.
Let me tell you a little something about when I get busted by the feds.
So we sent out some cameras.
I was fired for where I parked my car.
You shot it. We air it. Edit that. It's MTV News Unfiltered. Monday night at 10. This time, if it sucks, it's your fault.
Newt Raw on MTV is brought to you by AT&T.
How easy is it to save 25% on AT&T? This easy. With AT&T True Savings, our simplest way to save 25% on calls to everyone. Spend just $10 a month and we'll subtract 25% off your AT&T bill. That's it. You can call anyone, anytime, anywhere in the U.S. Talk to your brother in Texas. Catch up with friends in Florida. With AT&T, saving 25% to everyone is easy. Just call. Your true choice, AT&T.
Ford Contour brings you a world of innovative performance ideas, like the powerful yet efficient Z-Tech engine, and the Duratec that can go 100,000 miles before its first recommended tune-up, which is a long way down the road. Ideas like the Quadra-Link suspension, so smart, it allows your rear wheels to adjust in sync with the front for more precise control, and that's a turn for the better. The totally new Ford Contour, a world car for the 21st century, well equipped for just $14,670.
Have I ever told you my lifeguard fantasy?
How about some frozen daiquiris? I'll go make them.
Ever notice how long it takes to make a frozen drink?
Do you know what he said to me?
Is it ready yet?
And we galloped.
Is it ready yet? Is it ready yet?
That's why we invented tropical freezes. Daiquiris, margaritas, and punches with the alcohol already in them.
So to make a long story short, is it ready yet?
Tropical freezes. It's already ready already.
It was just a dream.
They're real.
Then we'll execute them.
With Oxy 10. Oxy's medicine penetrates pores to kill 97% of your acne bacteria in 24 hours. So in days.
They're fading fast.
Guaranteed.
Hi.
You look great.
Ask world long jump champion Mike Powell why he trains like he trains. And he'll tell you, you don't break a 23-year-old record without getting your feet wet. The Delta Cross Trainer by Fila.
You know, water's fun.
for creating a thirst. But when it comes to quenching one, that's why there's Gatorade. Hey, life is a sport. Drink it up.
Welcome back to Newt Raw. When Newt Gingrich was a student at Tulane University, he inhaled, he wore sideburns before they were fashionable, and he led a campaign on behalf of the student newspaper's right to print nude photos. Well, we don't have any of those nude photos for you here, but here is a little bit about who he is and where he came from.
Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich was born Newton McPherson on June 17, 1943, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. His teenage parents divorced soon after the birth, leaving 18-year-old Kit to raise her son alone until she married Army officer Robert Gingrich, who adopted Newtie at age 3. The military family moved from base to base during Newt's childhood, finally settling at Fort Benning near Columbus, Georgia. At 19, Newt married his high school geometry teacher, 26-year-old Jackie Batley, while attending Atlanta's Emory University. He helped found the school's Young Republicans chapter and went on to earn a Ph.D. in history from Tulane University in New Orleans. He was deferred from the Vietnam draft because he was a student and a father of 2 young girls. Gingrich, his wife, and daughters, Jackie Sue and Kathy, then moved to Carrollton, Georgia, where he taught history at West Georgia College. He lost his first 2 congressional campaigns in 1974 and 1976, but was victorious in 78. Newt divorced Jackie in 1980 after 19 years of marriage, and shortly thereafter wed Marianne Ginther, 8 years his junior. Gingrich's unbent determination to lead his party to power eventually landed him the highest office in the United States House of Representatives, 2 heartbeats from the presidency.
All right, that was your life. Ariel, you had a question about student loans?
Yeah, especially for those of us who are going into the lower income professions, who aren't becoming doctors, it's really frightening to be building up like huge debts when we don't even know for sure if we're going to be able to get a job with a BA in this lousy labor market. So, I mean, like $500 a year is pretty much the figure I've heard that's going to go up for how much we're going to have to pay back. And that can really mean the difference between a college education and no college education for a lot of us.
$500 a year,
yeah.
that's how much it would increase.
Let me come back and I'll just try to be very clear here. There are 2 things at stake. One is we're working very hard to balance the budget. If we balance the budget, Chairman of the Fed, Alan Greenspan and others have estimated, we'll save between 1.5 and 2 percentage points a year, every year of your life in interest rates. So every time you buy a car, every time you buy a house, anything you buy will be that much cheaper over your lifetime. And that, frankly, will offset a great deal of the amount you just talked about if you take buying a house or buying a car. The second thing we're trying to do is we're trying to get costs to be accurate, because if we, as I said a minute ago, if we ran a surplus and I could loan you the money and say, fine, the government will pay you, the taxpayers don't have to worry about it as a student, we'll just take care of the interest. That's not what's going to happen to you. Under the current system, when you get that job, you're going to pay more taxes in order to pay the interest on the very same loan. The only difference will be the loan will be called the national debt. It won't be called the student loan. But it's not, the choice right now is not between do you pay for it or don't you pay for it. The choice is, do you pay for it directly because you borrowed it and it's your loan, or do you pay for it as a taxpayer because you borrowed it and it's your loan? And we're just saying we think that it's dishonest to tell you here's a free loan if in fact what you have is the interest in the government debt that the entire rest of your life you're going to pay for.
It's not a free loan. I'm a law student. I'm going to come out with $90,000 in debt. Now, I know that you definitely agree with the idea that students should get involved in their communities and they should give back to the government. One thing I'd love to do is go into public interest law, but I can't with $90,000 of debt hanging over my head and interest payments that I can't defer. What do I do?
Okay. Let me try one more time, because the question here is not, are you going to pay interest on your loan? The question is, are you going to pay it directly because it comes to you in the form of a loan, or as a taxpayer when you become a lawyer, are you going to pay it anyway? The liberals aren't loaning you the money interest-free. The liberals are saying, I'm going to hit you as a taxpayer for the same interest. It's exactly the same interest. And so you're going to pay it one way or the other. We believe it's more honest to tell you up front, here is what you're borrowing, and here's your interest. The government has no money right now. So anytime they give you an interest-free loan, they have borrowed the money on your credit, and as a taxpayer, when you get out, your taxes will be higher, and you'll pay higher interest rates in order to get that loan.
Mr. Speaker, you mentioned some of your budget plans. Let me just quickly find out whether you'd support these specific proposals. For instance, you have proposed some tax breaks for our parents and our grandparents. Would you consider making student loans tax deductible?
I would. I'd consider borrowing any investment in your education being tax deductible.
Okay.
I would also say, frankly, in our plan, if you are a working mother and we have a $500 per child tax credit, which means we would literally lower your taxes by $500 for every child that you had. We think that helps families, and we think that's a good step in the right direction.
Right, but some young people can see that as you giving our parents $500, but because of the loan...
Well, I think at the age group that's this table, I'm potentially giving all of them $500.
Yeah, but they could go to Europe with that money, too. But let me ask you quickly two more things. A lot of young people, also, you have a first-time home owner's tax credit as well, and since none of us can really afford homes and we're flipping burgers at McDonald's many times, would you consider a tax rate for rent?
No, I don't think we ever thought. Okay. What we want to do is, frankly, and have just a tax break for first-time homes, but also a tax break to save the money to buy the home.
Right.
So that we give people an incentive to be able to move in. We think it's very helpful for everybody to have a shot at buying and owning a home.
And in terms of the worries around the table about not being able to get a job with their expensive degree, do you have any plans to provide an investment tax credit for companies who hire young people right out of college? Can you provide some incentives?
Not specifically right out of college, but we have a lot of plans to have incentives for companies to hire more Americans. We have a survey right now being done by Senator Connie Mack and Congressman Jim Paxton to ask every major multinational, what are the changes you need to create the next 1,000 high-value added jobs in the U.S. instead of creating them in China or Japan or Germany or somewhere else? Because we want to make this the most competitive country in the world, so major corporations and people who are investing in the world market decide that creating jobs in America is a more desirable future than creating jobs overseas.
Wait, I'll get to your question. We just got to take a break. I promise I'll come back to you, Jim. So we'll be right back. We'll tackle abortion, guns, crime, welfare, and continue this discussion right after this.
It's summer, and America's honor students are ready.
When people get pregnant, they have to be chicks, right?
This summer, MTV's dealing a monster Beavis and Butthead hand, kicking things off with 6 new episodes.
Playing all the same crap for like years and years?
Oh, yeah.
It's happening tonight, and all this week at 11:30.
I see the beauty.
Dress appropriately.
Newt Raw on MTV is brought to you by AT&T.
Will I get the lowest price on a collect call dialing 1-800-COLLECT? But isn't 1-800-COLLECT AT&T?
1-800-COLLECT is not AT&T. It's actually MCI. And a more expensive way to call collect.
So why didn't MCI just say they were 1-800-COLLECT?
Next time, know the code. Dial 1-800-CALL-ATT. You'll always get a price that's less than MCI's 1-800-COLLECT. That's your true choice. AT&T.
The new Ford Contour is full of great ideas at a great price. Exciting ideas, like Wonderlink suspension for crisp, responsive handling. Comforting ideas, like air conditioning and Contour's exclusive Micron air filter. Safe ideas, like dual airbags and remote heated mirrors. Sound ideas, like an AM/FM stereo cassette. And maybe the best idea, you get all this for just $14,670. Great ideas at a great price. The totally new Ford Contour.
Popping with flavor, more flavor than ever, and lift that too. It's the right thing to do. Popping with flavor. Pringles right, crisp flavors, they're new. And the tastings of Jing, right thing to do. Tangy, sour cream and onion, now more flavor on the chin. Less fat and less grease across your lips. Popping with flavor. Pringles right, crisp flavor. Once you pop, you can't stop.
Fresh-picked tea leaves, dried in pure mountain air. Lipton brews 200 leaves to fill just one bottle of Lipton Original. There's only one original, Lipton Original.
Poor lonely fishy. His owners are far, far away at Disneyland. No wonder he's so blue.
Of course, for big theme park fun that's close to home, they could have gone to Six Flags Astro World and soared on Texas' only indoor roller coaster, met Bugs Bunny, and made a splash at Six Flags Water World, all here in Houston.
Which is why fish whose owners vacation at Six Flags Astro World lead happier, more colorful lives.
Get a free ticket when you buy one with specially marked cans of Coca-Cola Classic.
It can strike in a flash. You'd think twice before getting too close to this guy. So why would you even consider going near something even more dangerous? Stay away from power lines. They can kill you instantly. A safety message from Houston Lighting and Power.
Your favorite icy flavors. Try a creamy hootie and the Blowfish Pop. Crunch into a nutty naughty by nature. Taste the tangy lemon center of a U2 Frosty Freeze. And slurp up the Alanis Morissette. MTV Summer Variety. Suck it down and spoil your dinner.
Welcome back to Newt Raw. However you react to what Newt Gingrich is saying here today, he is already one of the most powerful speakers of the House in history. Here's why.
I do. Congratulations, Mr. Speaker.
With a solemn vow, Newt Gingrich rose to the highest position in the United States House of Representatives, Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Under the Constitution, there are no duties and no powers of the Speaker. The Constitution simply says that the House shall choose its Speaker.
Taking cues from the English model, the Speaker's duties are parliamentary in nature.
Order! We need order in this House.
The Speaker controls floor debate, deciding who can talk, when they can talk, for how long, and about what.
Gentlemen from Michigan's recognized.
In any bureaucratic or organizational structure, a person who controls debate has informal power.
And each speaker has used that power to varying degrees. Most have risen methodically through the official ranks of their party. But Gingrich bucked the system and leapfrogged over Republican minority leaders that he felt were too passive.
I think the average American likes representatives who are willing to stand up and fight.
Traditionally, speakers only vote on legislation to break a tie or in matters of great personal conviction. But Gingrich has regularly used his vote to support the party's program.
He has shown more interest in voting in a broader range of legislative issues than any speaker before him. He is somebody who has a vision for the country and wants to try to implement it from the people's chamber.
Even before he was elected Speaker of the House, Gingrich spelled out his vision in the contract with America.
Today on these steps, we offer this contract as a first step towards renewing American civilization.
The 10-point plan was used as a rallying cry by fellow Republicans campaigning for Congress in the fall of '94. Their stunning victory in the November election gave Republicans control of both the House and the Senate for the first time in 40 years, forcing President Clinton to respond to the agenda set by the opposition party.
The Speaker clearly has the capacity to start things, to set and control the agenda so long as his party's with him, in ways that even a president cannot.
Under Gingrich's self-imposed 100-day timetable, most of the contract's provisions were whisked through the House, but they don't all become law until they are approved by the Senate and the Democratic president.
With the use of the veto pen, the president always has the final word on whether legislation, passes or fails.
Gingrich, however, has strived to put his speakership on equal footing with the presidency.
Gingrich is clearly the dynamic ideas driver on the Republican side, and Bill Clinton has to get in front of that train, otherwise it appears that he's being run down by it.
So did the framers of the Constitution intend for a congressional representative elected by 100,000 Georgians to be as powerful in shaping the law of the land as a president elected by 45 million Americans?
I'm not sure the Founding Fathers contemplated that, but I'm not sure they would have been opposed to it because, 200 years ago there was considerable concern about a accumulating too much power in one branch of government, particularly the executive branch, you know. Give us no king.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, a lot of young people are very cynical about politics and think it's a bit of a game. John, do you feel like when you hear politicians talking in Washington that they're speaking to you?
I think they're speaking at me and more actually towards the interest groups that are supporting them.
But you do consider yourself more of a Republican than...
Well, more conservative. I really don't like to be labeled as a Republican.
How about you, Jim? You think that you consider yourself a Republican. Yeah, does what you hear come out of Washington have anything to do with your life?
I'm definitely a Republican. I mean, one of the things about Washington, a question I'd like to ask is, in the 1980s, there was a lot of talk about balancing the budget, and that never happened. And I think most Americans and most young people really do want the budget balanced. I mean, can we trust you guys? Is this time, is it for real? Is it going to happen?
There's two different questions. First of all, no, you can't trust anybody with power. I mean, I don't think anybody should trust anyone with power. If you loan power to somebody, watch them. And if they don't do what they say they'll do, take the power back. But I think, you know, it's a two-way street, and you have to have an obligation, and you shouldn't say, well, I really trust you, call, you know, I'll check in a decade and see if you did your job. Second, in our case, you ought to check the track record. We had a contract with America, and I thought that was an excellent introduction to what we were doing that we just saw just now. And in that contract, we said we'd pass 31 pieces of legislation. We passed 30 out of the 31 in the House. Many of them are still in the Senate, but some have already passed the Senate, too, and a couple have already been signed by the President. We've now said we'll pass a balanced budget. We spent months designing it, and we actually voted and passed a balanced budget, first in the House, then in the Senate. Now, it's a 7-year plan.
That's happened before, though.
No, but no, you've not had an actual 7-year balanced budget plan ever passed in this form. Now we're passing appropriations bills. Every bill we brought out so far, and we brought out, I think, 6 of them so far, every one has been within the budget limits. We've actually cut domestic spending. That's part of why we're talking about things like the student loan program. The second thing we're going to do is, come September, we're going to change the entitlements. And we're going to move to lower this, and this is a real law with real long-term implications. So you will be able to know by October 1st whether or not we actually passed in the Congress all of the major changes we said we would make in order to get to a balanced budget. And as I said a while ago, that both lowers interest rates for every single thing you buy, and at the same time we think it's going to allow us to lower taxes and to increase the number of jobs in this country. We think that's a big net positive, and we think it's worth a lot of effort to
It's a great idea. We just want I want to see it happen.
I think you'll find it is going to happen.
You have said that politics is more than a game and that your politics represents your principles. Because of that, I want to ask you about your comments about abortion. You've called it infanticide, and that means murder. Do you believe that your sister or your daughter, who are both pro-choice, are advocating murder?
No, they're not advocating murder because they don't agree with me on when conception, whether or not life begins at conception. The whole issue of abortion boils down to a simple argument. When do you think life begins?
Well, that's a moral question. I'm pro-life, and I find the moral question and the political question inseparable. How do you deal with it? And is it even a question that the legislature can answer?
Okay, well, let me ask you this, because you're going to law school.
I find that it's impossible.
No. As a lawyer, because you're going to be a lawyer. As a lawyer, you walk into a courtroom. Which date does the person who is deceased become a person? Is it at birth?
I don't think that anyone can answer the question.
But of course you have to as a lawyer. I agree with you ethically, by the way, that each one of us has to make a moral decision. We have to, and this is where my daughter and I, or my sister and I, would disagree. But my point is, as a lawyer, you have a date. Now, when they're 10 years old, are they alive?
Absolutely.
Okay. How about when they're a year old?
Yes.
Okay. How about when they're a day old?
Yes.
Okay. So at what point do they become alive? Now, once you agree that you have to define that, okay, I believe it happens at conception. I mean, I don't particularly like to believe that. I wish I didn't believe that, because it'd be easy to say.
I have a problem with your beliefs impinging on my right to control my reproductive freedom. And I don't know what your party and Congress and government will do to ensure that I will be able to exercise my right to get a therapeutic abortion if need be, and all the other American women out there.
Let's draw two distinctions. First of all, in terms of controlling reproduction, on the family planning side, I am totally committed and think you should have every right to have access to all of the various contraceptive devices or pills or whatever you want to avoid pregnancy. When you become pregnant, if it's because of rape or incest or if there's a therapeutic problem in terms of life of the mother, I think you should have access to abortion.
Yes, but then...
That's my position. I think
How can you say that if you've also said that abortion is infanticide? I mean, infanticide is a severe term.
I think historically there are reasons for a society to make difficult choices. Again, you're going to law school. Part of the purpose of the law is to codify hard choices. A lot of life is not easy choices.
I want to move on now to the environment. Ron, did you have a question concerning that?
Yeah, you were speaking about the contract with America, and I think that a lot of it is sort of some things that most people in the country would certainly agree with, want to see happen. It's nice that it's so popular, but there's a lot of stuff in there that's really going to hurt the environment. I mean, some of the things that are pushing back the OSHA regulations, and you know, the unfunded mandates would make some of the Clean Water Acts unpassable and stuff like that. How is that going to improve? Well, how is having dirty water going to improve my life?
Having dirty water doesn't improve your life, but there's an example in one of the morning papers today of a facility in New Hampshire which spent $9 million to clean itself up to the point where the children could eat the dirt 70 days a year without it being polluting. And the EPA said that wasn't good enough, and they spent $7 million more to get the dirt up to where you could eat it 270 days a year. Now, let me just suggest, I mean, this is a real story.
But that's extreme.
Okay.
Kids probably should be eating dirt.
That is extreme, but that's, of course, what the kids do occasionally. Of course, that's extreme, and that's our point. There are places where the federal bureaucracy lost all common sense. And what we're trying to find out is how do you strike a balance. I used to teach environmental studies. I spent a lot of my time and energy with the Atlanta Zoo working on endangered species. In fact, I'll be back on the floor of the House today talking about saving the rhinoceros and saving the elephant and the tiger, because we have a vote coming up today on this issue. But it does seem to me there's a common sense level here. And I'll give you two examples. 80% of the money in Superfund cleanup went to lawyers and bureaucrats. It did not go to clean up the sites.
But no, I don't think anyone, no matter how, I don't think there are very many people in this country, anyone who would argue that Superfund works well. But saying that, attacking the result doesn't mean that government doesn't have an obligation.
But we agree with you. We're going to pass a new Superfund bill. We're going to pass a bill that works.
But isn't it extreme to cut EPA funding by 1/3? I mean, that's a large amount.
It depends on whether or not you think you can, in fact, get the job done in other ways. I mean,
can they get the job done with that?
I think if you, and I'm told by the various states, the state of California, the state of Georgia, and others, that if EPA will work with them, that there are more than enough total people at the state and federal level to do the job. But again, part of it is we don't particularly want EPA to micromanage down at a level that makes no, to have federal bureaucrats on somebody's land at a level of micromanagement that we think makes no sense. And reasonable people can argue about what's the most effective way to get there.
But a lot of this regulatory flexibility that you've been talking about can have an impact from state to state. I mean, water pollution in Illinois can harm people downstream in Missouri.
Absolutely.
Didn't we pass all these protections on a federal level because the states weren't doing their jobs well enough, and because we recognize these as national issues?
They are national issues, and I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to say to Illinois, you will have your water at this quality before it goes into Missouri. But again, let me give you a specific real example. San Diego was being required by EPA to build a $10 billion waste treatment facility. In terms, again, of you're being a teacher paying California taxes at some point, $10 billion. The design of the facility was for the Great Lakes. San Diego's on the Pacific Ocean, which is the largest body of water in the world. No oceanographer thought it made any sense to spend $10 billion in this facility. We've intervened and said, why? It probably costs about $7 billion more than the facility they need.
Well, who in God's name planned that one?
EPA. I mean, this has been a running fight for 7 years. I've talked to Governor Wilson about it. I've talked to Mayor Golding of San Diego about it. This has been a running fight for 7 years. And San Diego comes back to EPA and says, this is the Pacific Ocean. Here's the Scripps Oceanographic Institute.
But we also have to be honest about the issue. I mean, the regulations on environment are very harmful to the corporations. I mean, isn't the deregulation going to help the corporation?
They may or they may not. I mean, if it
helps corporations but doesn't hurt the environment.
On that note, let me take another quick break. Let me be the bad guy, but we'll be right back with more Newt Raw. Stay tuned.
Recently, Subway asked us, Bucky and Vinny, to review their turkey and bacon deluxe.
So we decided to do a little research.
This is where turkey is.
Where's the bacon? Well, what do we think?
It's great. We got nice, juicy turkey with all the trimmings on fresh baked bread topped with slices of real bacon.
That's what makes it deluxe.
Hey, look, even brought napkins. Subway, what a sandwich.
Motorcycle gang!
Go Rangers!
Marathon!
Remember, it's not only how fast you can go, it's also where you can go. The new Honda Passport, with standard dual airbags and one powerful V6 engine.
Oh, there. From Walt Disney Pictures, he is going to get you a new elephant.
I am not getting them an elephant.
Got no elephant? They walked it. They floated it.
No, she's seasick. Now she's gonna blow! Hey, what?
But when things got really ugly, they decided to drop it. Disney's Operation Dumbo Drop. Rated PG. Starts Friday, July 28th at a theater near you.
Our lives are ultra intense. We have major pressures. The Secret made something revolutionary for us. Ultra Dry. This is huge. Keeps you drier than any other kind out there. A pH-balanced soft solid that goes on dry and vanishes that fast. So 2 clicks give us ultimate dryness. Our lives demand it. Secret Ultra Dry. Strong enough for him. But now, the ultimate in dryness for us.
These people are guilty of washing with ordinary soap, condemned to rough, flaky skin. But try Noxzema for 7 days and your skin can be softer and smoother. So get out from behind bars and get healthier-looking skin with Noxzema.
There's no better way to enjoy classic TV than with Nick at Night's Block Party Summer.
It's more than perfect. It is inspired.
Let Nick at Night fill your plate with hearty 6-episode blocks of your favorite shows every weeknight all summer long.
No goody, 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 goody.
Monster Mondays, Lucy Tuesdays, Bewitched Be Wednesdays, Genie Thursdays, and Cotter Fridays.
Hey, that's a great idea.
So come back for 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, even 6th during Nick at Night's Block Party Summer all summer long.
Welcome back to Newt Raw. Both the Democrats and the Republicans want to make changes with welfare. What was your experience with the welfare system, Ariel?
Well, I had my daughter when I was 19 years old and I was about to start college, and I needed welfare child support in order to go to college. So my question to you is pretty much just what would you have me do in that situation?
We would keep the Women's, Infants, and Children's program for nutrition. We would keep the food stamp program so you'd have an opportunity to get food. And we'd require you either to go to school or to work. I mean, those would be the basic requirements. So since you were going to school, I doubt if there'd be any major change.
Well, under your plan, actually, the way I understand it, it would only be 2 years, so I would be able to get like half a BA. I wouldn't really be able to go to school.
And I think that the question there is whether or not welfare is the right way to subsidize people going to college. But
well, it was child support to feed my daughter.
Let me start again. First of all, we would ask you to tell us who the father was, and we would tell the father he owes you money, and we would enforce the father paying you money, because we think the father ought to directly subsidize your child. Second, we would provide food through Women's, Infants, and Children program, and we provide food through food stamps, so you would still get all of the nutrition and all the food components.
You're not cutting any nutrition programs?
No, we're not cutting those. we do cut the direct cash grant.
Would the father payment work for you?
Well, the father of my child is low income, like, you know, most low-income women date low-income men.
Right, but he ought to pay something for that as child support.
What if she was under 18 when she had the child?
The father should still pay. The father should still pay something as child support. She should still be eligible. She should still be eligible for food, for women's, infants, and children nutrition, and she should be eligible for food stamps. But any cash grant ought to go through an adult.
But no welfare and no federal government help?
The cash welfare payment should go either through her parents or it should go through a guardian. But the idea, not at 18, the idea that a 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old is given cash for getting pregnant, I think is very destructive and is directly tied to the whole breakdown of the system.
What did you want to say, Jim?
I would agree. I don't think that it's really a good thing to have 13-year-olds having kids when they're kids themselves.
But that sort of implies that people who go on welfare want to stay on welfare instead of working when they make about $125 a week. I mean, that's not much incentive.
I'm not implying anything about what they want. I'm saying, first of all, you shouldn't give 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds money for getting pregnant. Second, that you ought to make the males pay. The fathers ought to have some direct obligation when they have children. And I'm saying, third, that our goal is to get people off of welfare, to get them into a work habit. When you have 3 and 4 generations on welfare, I mean, it's not whether they want to be or don't want to be. We have a whole system of incentives now that locks people into public housing and locks people into welfare, and that is very destructive of this society.
Does that make sense?
I mean, I totally agree with you that fathers should pay child support, but what happens is that when the fathers do not pay, then I am punished.
The child is punished. The child is punished.
Well, the government should force
we should require them to pay, and we should require them to pay penalties and interest if they don't meet their payments in a regular schedule. For example,
are you for guaranteeing that child support in the form of welfare?
I'm for finding a way. No, I'm for finding a way to guarantee the loan to you of that child support, and have the government collect it directly from that father if need be. The burden should be on the father to pay the child support. It should not be on the mother to collect it.
Men have to take responsibility for their actions.
Exactly.
What about work requirements? Won't it be even more expensive, though, to institute workfare-type programs?
It hasn't been anywhere it's been tried. It's cheaper. I mean,
well, how do you expect single mothers to go to work if they don't have daycare, because the House bill has no provisions for daycare?
Well, I think part of the work will be daycare. I mean, that is, some single mothers will be running a daycare program as part of their work requirement so that other mothers go and do something else.
But you sent your own daughter to Head Start. Why wouldn't you want to ensure the same kinds of services?
We keep Head Start.
No, Head Start still.
Head Start still exists.
There are some cuts, aren't there?
No. Head Start's very big. Yes, and it's very big. Much bigger than it was when my daughter went to. Look, when I was married and my wife got pregnant, she was a school teacher. I was a college student. We swapped out for a while. And for one period, my older daughter, Kathy, I stayed home and raised her during the day. I went to school at night. We got a local lady who took care of her along with 4 other children for a while. Ultimately, she ended up in Head Start. When we were in Brussels while I was working on my dissertation, my younger daughter actually went to a Belgian kindergarten. There are all sorts of arrangements people make. But right now, we send the signal to people that you don't have to work. And
if you are talking about young women who are pregnant, and they may be in a bad situation in the first place, they may not have a good family support network, they may not have a man who's going to pay for their child support. So you're just throwing them out, just saying, we are not going to support you, we're not going to. Well, it doesn't seem as though if they have to go through their parents, if they have to go through their husband, they're going to be dependent on the people who may be failing them in the first place.
But if you're 13, 14, or 15 years old, you ought to be how something. The idea that we're going to liberate 13-year-olds to get pregnant and give them money.
It may not be the reality of how it is out there.
But my point is, if you're 13, 14, or 15, and you're in a terrible home environment, and the man you slept with who got you pregnant, in fact, is totally irresponsible, there ought to be some place you turn to have an intermediary who helps protect you.
Okay,
now, that can be, I got in trouble for saying earlier, that can be a group home, that can be some kind of charitable organization, it can be any of a number.
That's going back to the dark ages. And it's
what's the dark ages about?
Connected to all.
You don't think, wait, so I'm going to say you don't think what happens today to 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds in the inner city, where you end up with drug addiction, prostitution, violence, spouse abuse, abandoned children, you don't think that's a dark ages of a modern kind?
But I think that's because of economic deprivation, not because
That's because
Rob, did you have
subject.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to get back to the discussion about corporations. I don't think people in our generation understand the importance of the corporation in the general economic sphere. How do you see the role of deregulation as helping increase consumerism among poor people and helping us get jobs?
Well, I mean, one of our primary goals, frankly, is to create the economic opportunity and to create the drive in the world market so that we can create the maximum number of jobs, and not just jobs, but jobs that have high salaries and jobs that have a high long-term capability. We also, frankly, want to make it easier for you to go out and start your own company. I mean, one of the major things, and this is particularly liberating women, because women now found about 60% of all the new small businesses. We want to make it as easy as possible for a person to go out and create a new venture, create a new opportunity. And if you look at job creation, what happens with regulatory overhead and red tape and Washington bureaucracy is all of that slows down the growth of new jobs and the growth of new opportunities. And I think for young people, when they leave college and they look around and they say, all right, now, where am I going to get a job? If you don't have a dynamic private sector that's out creating the new jobs and competing in the world market, you're going to have a dramatic fall off in opportunity.
Rob, did you have a question about another topic?
Yeah, well, sort of segueing
common
into
interest.
that. One of the things one of the things that's helped those small businesses start is how technology is getting cheaper. We're coming into the digital age. I know you've talked a lot about that. But you know, you've talked in the Magna Carta for the Knowledge Age about what you can do for the corporations, but we have a lot of people in America who don't necessarily have the skills to compete in that age. I mean, with education being cut, with people unable to afford college, I mean, how is the United States going to compete?
Let me go back. First of all,
briefly,
total spending in education in America goes up every year. And it's going to keep going up every year. Second, if we add in the unemployment compensation as a form of money for training, so if you're unemployed, you get trained as part of your unemployment compensation, we dramatically increase it. And third, I agree with you. We have to figure out how to help every American become computer literate and help every American get into the information age if they're going to have a real economic opportunity in the 21st century.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, we're almost out of time, so just
maybe
between
out of town.
that too. But just between you and me, Mr. Speaker, are you in or out for 96?
Beats me. I'm having a lot of fun doing a lot of interesting things like this. And I should say, I think that my nephews Mark and John will now be happy because I'm here
now you're on MTV.
Tonight.
Well, one last question. Since you've broken the mold of elevating the role of the Speaker of the House, how can you help young people break the mold of only participating in politics when the elections come around, if even that?
I mean, again, I think when you're young, you're busy doing a lot of things, getting educated, earning a living, finding a mate, a whole lot of things. But I would say if you could find a little time every month to do something in your community. I wear a Habitat for Humanity pin and a Earning by Learning pin, 2 programs that are voluntary. Anybody can go help build a Habitat house. And they're usually done on Saturdays. I mean, it takes 2 hours or 3 hours, and once a month. I think we ought to be citizens more than just voting. We ought to be citizens in really caring for our neighbors and finding some opportunity once a month to do something to help somebody other than ourselves. I think we'd be a dramatically better country.
Well, good advice. Thanks so much to our panelists for giving us a piece of their minds, and of course to Mr. Speaker. There's a lot of issues we didn't get to, and hopefully you'll come back to MTV and we'll continue this informative dialogue with young people. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
We've got Singled Out for you up next, followed by Beavis and Butthead and Alternative Nation at midnight. Don't speak Mojo Chachi when the love is gone.
University of Michigan, and she worked for Ross Perot in 1992. Joining us from California is 25-year-old Ariel Gore, a graduate student at UC Berkeley and a single mother of a 5-year-old who has been on welfare most of that time. Hikasa Wapenyi, she's proud to say she has liberal views, she's from New York, she has a degree from Harvard, and is in medical school at Tufts. John Crane is conservative about most issues. He's 21 years old, from Richmond, Virginia, and works as a painting contractor. Our second guest from California is Rob Levine, originally from Connecticut. He works at the internet publication of Wired magazine, and he too is fond of the L word. But first, Mr. Speaker, welcome. We're glad to have you here. Before we get into our discussion today, I'd like to ask you a question that's been in the news recently. President Clinton has come out for uncoerced school prayer. Do you think we still need a constitutional amendment on school prayer?
Well, I think we have to see exactly what that means in legal terms, and I thought it was a very positive step in the right direction. I'm delighted to see that he agrees that there have been some examples of repression sufficiently important that the President's now sending apparently this document to every school in the country to say, yes, you do have these rights. So I think, first of all, let's school year this fall, see if it stands up in court, and I think it's a very positive step in the right direction.
Okay, well, let's get started with our panelist questions. Since there are so many students here, we want to start with the topic of education and cutting school loans.
Okay, Speaker Gingrich, I'm a Republican, and I definitely agree with a lot of your positions and a lot of the positions in the contract with America. But one thing I can't really agree with are proposed cuts or freezes in educational funding, especially in the society that we're living in today. I was wondering if you could comment on that and how you think that will affect young people and their drive for education and careers.
Sure. I want to draw a distinction between, this is a very complicated topic. You talk about cuts in education, whether you're talking about slowing down the rate of increase in some things, or you're talking about education before college, education in college, graduate school. Let me take just a couple quick examples. I think we ought to have lifetime learning. I think we ought to find ways to say that all your life you're going to have to keep learning, you're going to do different things. I think we ought to take all the unemployment compensation and say if you're going to get unemployment compensation, you ought to be doing something to learn, that we shouldn't be giving you money to subsidize deer hunting and bass fishing. And if you need the money in order to get a better job, fine, but then you ought to get training. That actually increases the available money for education by $8 or $9 billion a year at the adult level. Second, I think the only argument we're having over student loans, there's no argument about getting the student loan. We all agree that everybody ought to be able to borrow the money. The only argument is whether or not you ought to directly pay back the money, or whether as a taxpayer you ought to indirectly pay the interest on the debt. And let me make this.
I am the mighty beach house Jiki God, the artist formerly known as Gelfar the Plunderer. At 10 p.m. watch Newt Raw, 11 p.m. Singled Out, 11:30 p.m. Beavis and Butthead, and at 12 midnight Alternative Nation. Now stay tuned for Newt Raw.
Hi, I'm Tabitha Soren, and I have two words for you: Newt Raw.
This is your standard set?
No, sir. That was just for you.
And are you all ready?
That we're all set. Yeah, it should be fun. Make sure we have fun.
Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, the most talked about man in politics and the man who's doing most of the talking these days, has joined MTV News for an unedited, no-holds-barred conversation about the agenda he has set for America and why you should care. Joining us are Jim Brennan, a 21-year-old senior at Dartmouth, a member of the college's conservative union and originally from New Jersey. Kate Ross is from Chicago. She's 22 years old and law school at the...
It's very quick, because I think this is one of the phoniest arguments going on right now. If you had somebody who sent you a present for your birthday,
okay,
and about a month later after you'd thanked them, this bill showed up in the mail, because in fact they intended for you to pay for the present they sent you, you wouldn't think that was a particularly neat idea. A child born this year will pay $187,000 in interest on the federal debt in their lifetime. That is...
But Mr. Speaker, don't you think that...
Let me just make this point. That is, they'll pay $3,500 every year they work for their entire lifetime, just for interest on the debt. So we're not loaning you money that somebody else is paying. What we're saying to the younger generation is, if we loan you, and this is the current liberal position, if we loan you interest-free loans, by the way, we are going to borrow that money, and when you get to go to work, you're going to pay the interest on your interest-free loans. The difference is, you might pay off your loans in 5, 8, 10, 15 years. You'll never pay off the federal debt. So you're going to literally pay for your entire lifetime for the very same loan that you were told was interest-free. We think it is more honest, and we think it's fairer to say to students, we'll guarantee you can borrow the money, we'll guarantee you can go to school, but then you ought to take care of the specific obligation you incur, because you could actually pay it off.
So you're saying it's a larger picture issue then?
Not just larger picture. You'll actually pay more money over your lifetime if the government loans you the money.
Don't you think it's in the interest of the entire society to have a better educated populace? I mean, we're not talking about sending people to college only so they can get better jobs. You're talking about making an investment in the future of America.
Sure. I believe that to the point where I think we ought to have a lot of money spent on education. But let's go back to the student loans again. Two of you graduate from high school at the same time. One of you goes off to become a painting contractor, goes to work. The other decides to go to college. The painting contractor is now working extra to loan you the money so you can go to college. You later on have a higher income than the painting contractor. Now, you decide to stay in college. You get another interest-free loan. You now become a plastic surgeon. You're now making $300,000 a year. I'm just suggesting to you that
isn't that why
part of it ought to relate to your own self-interest and to a question of and again, I think we ought to guarantee you the loans. We ought to make sure you have access to them, and we should say you don't have to pay any of them back while you're in school.
Well, along those lines, we do actually have a painting contractor at the table, which is, I'm sure, the catalyst for your comment. But John fell through the cracks in terms of the student loan system. Tell him what happened to you.
I'm unable to receive financial aid because of the tax bracket that my parents fall into, and I've been, out from under their wing for 3 years, and I'm still, unable to receive financial aid. So what